June 18th, Bath Township, Ohio. Jeffrey Dahmer is 18, fresh out of high school where he had no friends. He's out driving, spots a hitchhiker, another young man. Dahmer is about to cross a line from which there's no turning back. A serial killer's first kill tells us a lot about the killer and about serial killers generally. But much of what we're told about Dahmer by experts is simply wrong. Let me convince you. Let's begin at the ending. Midnight, Milwaukee, July 1991. A man with handcuffs dangling from his wrist flags down a police cruiser. He's escaped from a small apartment on North 25th Street. Officers arriving to investigate find a living nightmare. Whispers spread through the apartment building and then through the neighborhood that the devil himself lives among them. Inside the devil's lair, officers quickly find body parts. 30 years old, Dahmer has killed 17 men over 13 years. His killing pace is accelerating. Picking up young gay men and male prostitutes, he invites them back to his apartment, slips drugs into their drink, then strangles them to death. Keeping their corpses, he engages in necrophilia and cannibalism in order to fuel his morbid fantasies. The scene police find, however, other than the body parts and the corpses, is relatively neat, antiseptic even. But unparalleled horrors lie just beneath the surface. Dahmer was born in Milwaukee in 1960. He eventually would have a younger brother. The family moved to Ohio in 1966. His parents were said to bicker constantly, the home racked with turmoil and anger, his neurotic mother battling with his short-fused father. Jeffrey was largely ignored by them. An oddball, he didn't have a lot of friends. Years later, kids who knew him then said he displayed a lack of empathy for other kids. Something was clearly off. He spent a lot of time alone in the woods, obsessed with death and dissection. He advanced from storing insects in jars filled with chemicals to decapitating stray dogs. In the woods behind Dahmer's house, another boy in the neighborhood once stumbled upon a mutilated dog nailed to a tree. As Dahmer's obsessions continued into puberty, they eventually fused with emerging sexual desires, which in his case were homosexual. Struggling socially at school, he turned to alcohol, even bringing scotch to school in a thermos. But it was the late 70s, a time of experimentation, and this alarmed no one. In 1978, his parents divorced. Despite the miserable state of the rancorous household Jeffrey had been in all his life, the divorce was rough on him. Hostility continued between his parents, and each tried to draw him into the battle to support one side or the other. It was at this time that Dahmer retreated into an inner world, a very dark world. In 1978, just out of high school, Dahmer attempted to act on his fantasies when he picked up a 19-year-old hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. Inviting him back to smoke dope and drink some beers, they ended up in the basement. Let's set the table for the horror that would ensue. Dahmer had been living largely within his own little world now for years. He had no friends, was ostracized at school, though deep in his own depths, he may have hardly noticed. His dad lived in a hotel. His mom and little brother had just moved out too, so he had the house to himself. What was on his mind when he picked up the hitchhiker? The popular retelling of Dahmer's life portrays an isolated and lonely man who only killed as a way to keep his victims with him. Don't believe it. The only version of this murder comes from Dahmer. According to him, it was only when Hicks wanted to leave that he slammed him on the head with a barbell from behind, then strangled him. He removed the flesh from the body, then dissolved it in acid, pulverizing the bones with a sledgehammer, spreading what remained into the woods. This was the way Dahmer would explain his early murders, that they were unplanned, almost unintentional. Experts and profilers want us to believe that his problem was fear of abandonment, a need rooted in his parents' divorce. Dahmer himself wants us to see him as someone who just didn't know how to develop normal human relationships, and killing would allow him to keep his victims in his life. Eating them would only further satisfy that need, as they'd now be part of him forever. However, those experts seemed to not notice that Dahmer had already bought a large vat of acid before he picked up the hitchhiker. To buy into Dahmer's nonsense, you have to forget that he was beheading dogs as a boy. To buy into it, you have to believe that Dahmer didn't spend his teen years fantasizing about murder, that he wasn't obsessed with death and bones and corpses. To buy into it, you have to have learned nothing about serial killers. The serial killer grows up developing obsessive fantasies about killing. There's usually a sexual component, but sex is secondary, a byproduct of raging hormones swimming through the adolescent brain as he develops these killing fantasies. But the killing is mostly about control, extreme control. Many psychologists reject the idea that Dahmer was a psychopath, and in fact, he did test just below psychopathy in prison questionnaires. But you have to understand that one of the superpowers of a psychopath is manipulation. Dahmer had no hope of ever leaving prison, but he did have an image of himself that mattered to him. This is why he spoke on camera from prison. However, Dahmer didn't just kill and possess his victims. Some of them he kept drugged, bound, and very much alive. He injected liquids such as bleach or boiling water into their brains, attempts, according to him, at creating zombies that would be obedient to him. But Dahmer was no fool. He understood enough about biology to know that this was nonsense. His real goal was simply to tinker and see what happened, much as he had with insects and animals as a boy. It was never about abandonment. As almost always with serial killers, it's about God-like control over another human being, a control which has fueled fantasies for years and centers on death and torture. So when Dahmer at 18 picked up the hitchhiker, I have absolutely no doubt that murder was always the goal. He'd have us believe, and many do believe, that murder only resulted from not wanting to see his new friend leave. No way. Killing and dissecting animals at an early age fits him right square in the middle of the standard serial killer profile. When the hitchhiker was in his basement, all Dahmer was waiting for was the right opportunity. And he'd been on the path to becoming a killer for years.